Welcome to this week's episode of Wellness and Us, where we explore health, wellness, and everything in between. I'm your host, Mark, and today we have a special treat for you. Join us as we dive into a fascinating conversation between two health experts, Dr. Mia Thompson and Dr. Alex Garcia, who will unpack insights from a recent lecture by the renowned communication expert, Matt Abrahams. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were put on the spot and struggled to find the right words to say? You're not alone. In this episode, Mia and Alex will guide us through that, drawing from Matt's strategies for thinking faster and talking smarter. We'll discuss the surprising signs your body might be sending you, proven strategies to manage anxiety and spontaneous communication, how to navigate tricky conversations, whether in meetings, small talk, or when giving feedback, and tips for becoming a more effective communicator in your personal and professional life. Stay tuned as Mia and Alex share their expertise and personal insights to help you develop your communication skills and thrive in any situation. Let's jump right in.
You know that feeling, right? The one where you're put on the spot, maybe asked an unexpected question in a meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Or you're in the middle of a tricky conversation, and then 2 hours later, the perfect thing to say pops into your head.
Happens all the time when you're long past the moment.
Exactly. Or maybe you walk away from a conflict just wishing you'd handled it, I don't know, with more grace or just more clarity.
We've definitely all been there, that feeling of wishing we could think faster, talk smarter, when it really counts.
Okay.
And that challenge, communicating effectively under pressure, whether it's unplanned or just naturally high stakes, it's incredibly common.
Right.
It touches on everything: spontaneous speaking, tricky decisions, navigating conflict well.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. For this deep dive, you've shared a really fantastic stack of material.
Yeah.
A collection of insights, research, conversations, mostly from Stanford experts who've really dug into the nuts and bolts of communication in these kinds of moments.
That's right. We've got sources covering, pretty much the whole spectrum. Managing that anxiety you feel when speaking up.
Yeah.
Understanding how simple word choices can have a huge impact. And even adopting a totally different mindset for high-stakes communication, borrowing from how venture capitalists think.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to unpack all that together. We want to pull out the most valuable sort of nuggets of knowledge and insight and give you practical tools, practical perspective that can genuinely help improve your communication when it matters most.
Yeah, we'll explore managing your internal state, mindset, anxiety, all that.
Okay.
Refining your message, your delivery, how to navigate those challenging interactions, like really listening, dealing with conflict, and then look at communication in specific contexts, like virtual meetings or big decisions.
Okay, let's jump right in, starting with something really foundational. Managing what's going on inside our own heads when we have to speak up, spontaneously.
Exactly. The sources really highlight that spontaneous speaking.
Yeah.
Introducing yourself, answering Q&A question, giving feedback off the cuff.
Yeah, the everyday stuff.
It's actually way more common than planned presentations.
Yeah.
And for a huge number of people, upwards of 85%, those moments bring on serious nervousness.
85%. Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. But honestly, totally relatable. That feeling of being put on the spot, it can trigger a real physical reaction, can't it?
It absolutely can.
Yeah.
And the sources make this really strong case that often the biggest impediment in those moments, it's us.
Ourselves.
Yeah. We get in our own way.
Yeah.
We overjudge. We over-evaluate what we're about to say before we even say it. Your brain's trying to help, aiming for perfection.
Right, trying to nail it.
But that internal editor can actually just freeze you up or make you stumble.
Okay, so how do you fight that urge for perfection when your brain is basically screaming at you to be brilliant, like right now? The sources mentioned something interesting. Maximizing mediocrity. Sounds totally wrong.
It does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Oh.
And that's kind of the point the sources make. The idea isn't go be mediocre.
Okay, good.
It's about giving yourself permission just to answer,
Right.
just to contribute, without that intense internal pressure cooker of needing to be perfect.
Ah, okay.
And the insight is, by taking that pressure off, by being okay with just being good enough in that moment,
Yeah,
you actually free up the mental bandwidth you need to think clearly.
right.
And ironically, that's often what allows your real insight, maybe even greatness, to
Huh.
just pop out spontaneously. It's like a psychological trick to bypass your own overthinking.
That framing really shifts it. It goes from being this huge performance anxiety thing to just participating.
Yeah.
And part of that seems to be reframing the situation itself.
Yeah,
Instead of seeing, say, a Q&A session as this threat,
right,
me versus them.
right, the adversarial thing.
Yeah. See it as an opportunity instead.
Yes, exactly. This reframing is super powerful. If you see it as a chance to connect or clarify or understand or collaborate, it fundamentally changes your internal state and your external demeanor too.
How so?
Well, if you perceive a threat, you might get defensive, right? Crossed arms, maybe you shrink a bit, give short, curt answers.
Yeah, that fight or flight response kicking in physically.
Precisely. But if you consciously shift your mindset, see it as an opportunity, you're much more likely to have, like, open posture, a collaborative tone. Yeah. You'll probably give longer, more thoughtful answers. It changes the whole dynamic from combat to joint exploration.
Okay, changing the mindset is key. But, when you're actually feeling that rush of anxiety, how do you make that shift? How do you implement it in the moment? The sources had some practical techniques for that.
They did, and one really crucial insight from the research is understanding this thing called the illusion of transparency.
Illusion of transparency.
Yeah. It's this psychological bias where we feel way more nervous on the inside and we think our nerves are way more obvious to others than they actually are.
Ah, so you feel like a wreck, but maybe don't look it.
Exactly. The sources suggest something like recording yourself speaking spontaneously can be a real eye-opener. You see the gap. You realize you don't look nearly as anxious as you feel. Just knowing this bias exists can actually be pretty calming.
That's actually a huge relief. You're probably doing better than you think.
Almost certainly. Another technique is temporary distraction. If you need a second to collect yourself when you're put on the spot,
Yeah.
you can subtly shift the audience's focus away from you. The sources suggest things like maybe ask a provocative question back to the group, or take a quick informal poll on the topic,
Oh, interesting.
or share an image, a quick video clip if appropriate, or even just comment on something neutral in the environment. It buys you a few crucial seconds to gather your thoughts without highlighting your own nervousness.
I like that. It's a clever way to hit pause without actually saying, hang on, I need a minute.
Right. And then there's a concept borrowed from therapy. Desensitization, or, controlled exposure.
Okay, what does that involve?
It means deliberately putting yourself in mildly judged situations, but in small doses. Like, maybe commit to asking just one question in a meeting this week, even if it makes you a bit nervous.
So baby steps.
Exactly. Over time, you build tolerance, you build comfort. The sources also mention visualization, or even using VR tools that simulate speaking to an audience as powerful ways to practice.
So you're kind of building up your confidence muscle by stepping into slightly uncomfortable zones.
Precisely. It's about practice, not just running away from the fear. And finally, the sources really emphasize focusing on the present moment.
Being present.
Yeah, because anxiety is often about worrying about the future, right? What might go wrong, hitting your goals.
True.
So redirecting your attention to the immediate moment can interrupt that anxious thought loop. This could be anything from doing a tricky mental task that demands focus, like counting backward by 17s from a big number,
Okay, that definitely requires concentration.
or listening really intensely to a piece of music, maybe doing some physical activity beforehand, or even something as simple as doing a tongue twister right before you need to speak.
A tongue twister. That seems random. How does that help with anxiety?
It's surprisingly effective
Yeah.
because, well, you have to be completely present and focused to get it right, don't you?
Yeah, you really do.
It's a difficult physical and mental task that just grounds you right here, right now, pulls your brain away from those future worries, and, as a bonus, it warms up your voice, which can also help combat that shaky feeling you get when nervous.
Huh. Okay, I can see that. And the sources mention practice games too, like shout the wrong name and give a gift. How do they fit in?
Right, those are like little improv-style games that build spontaneity and mental flexibility. Shout the wrong name, for example, trains your brain not to follow predictable patterns or stockpile answers.
So it makes you react more genuinely.
Yeah, less inhibitedly when you're put on the spot. And give a gift is about responding spontaneously to an imaginary offering. It practices that yes and principle from improv.
Okay.
And it reinforces the idea that interaction is an opportunity, a chance to co-create, rather than just a challenge you have to overcome. They're practical ways to drill those mindset and spontaneity muscles.
Okay, so once you've worked on the internal game, managing the anxiety, shifting the mindset, The next piece is refining the message itself.
Right.
And how it's delivered. The sources were clear. It's not just what you say.
But how you say it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Delivery and messaging are critical because they really dictate how your words land. The sources emphasize being incredibly mindful of your tone. That includes volume, projection, intonation, even your specific word choices. Your tone hugely impacts how the message is received, especially, in situations with potential conflict.
I can definitely see that. The exact same words can sound like an invitation or an accusation just based on tone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And being aware of nonverbal cues is vital too. Both noticing others' body language, crossed arms, maybe lack of eye contact signaling disagreement or discomfort,
Right.
and also actively controlling your own nonverbals to make sure they support your message. If your words say one thing and your body says another, it creates confusion, undermines trust.
And when it comes to the words themselves, clarity, conciseness, less is more.
That's a really consistent theme for communicating effectively under pressure. Before you speak, take even just a second to define your goal and think about your audience.
Okay.
What do you really need to get across? Who are you talking to? That focus helps you cut out the irrelevant stuff, use repetition sparingly, basically keep your audience engaged and your message crystal clear.
The sources also had some fascinating, almost surprising insights about the power of specific word choices, especially when you're navigating disagreements.
Yeah, this part is really interesting. Research cited in the sources shows a pretty stark difference based on just pronoun usage. Using the word you can feel accusatory. It significantly increases defensiveness, sometimes even leads to censorship, especially in written disagreements, think online forums. Imagine how different "you are wrong because" feels compared to something else.
Oh, instantly. Yeah, you always do this. That just puts someone right on the defensive.
Exactly. The research found that simply shifting to using we in disagreeing messages leads to less censorship, more openness, more collaboration.
Just changing you to we.
Yeah. It subtly shifts the frame from blaming an individual "you did this wrong" to discussing a shared issue or perspective. How do we solve this? It kind of leverages our natural desire for group belonging to smooth the way for cooperation. It's a powerful, almost invisible linguistic tool.
That's such a simple change, but potentially huge impact on working together. And they also talked about framing outcomes, right?
Yes, particularly for persuasion. The sources noted people are generally more persuaded when outcomes are described in terms of increasing something desirable,
Okay, gaining something good.
rather than decreasing something undesirable. So framing the benefit in a positive, additive way, this will help us gain X, resonates more strongly, feels more motivating than framing it as avoiding a loss or reducing a negative. This will stop us from losing Y.
Interesting. Focus on the gain, not just avoiding the pain.
Pretty much.
So we've talked of managing the internal state, refining the message. Now let's move into navigating the interactions themselves, especially listening and handling conflict. The sources really highlighted listening as, well, underappreciated, but absolutely fundamental.
It truly is. Effective listening is really the bedrock for understanding what others need and figuring out how to respond appropriately in the moment.
Right.
And the sources suggest most of us aren't naturally great listeners. We tend to listen just for the top line, the main point being stated, rather than the bottom line, which includes all the underlying stuff: context, emotion, unstated needs.
Okay, so if we're naturally not great at it, how do you actively get better, according to these sources?
Well, a key technique they advocate is listening as if you have to immediately paraphrase what the other person just said.
Ah, okay. That forces you to pay closer attention.
It forces deeper processing, yeah. It's not just about catching the words, but paying attention to how they're said, the emotion, the context, the pace, and then actually paraphrasing back sometimes. So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying X because of Y, is a fantastic way to validate your understanding. And the sources stress that validating understanding is crucial. But, and this is important, does not mean you have to agree with them.
Right. You're just checking you got it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're confirming comprehension, not endorsing their viewpoint. It builds trust without requiring agreement.
That's a really important distinction. You
Uh-huh.
can understand someone deeply without agreeing. And speaking of disagreement, the sources make a strong, maybe slightly uncomfortable case that conflict. Well, our instinct is usually to avoid it, right?
At all costs, yeah.
But they argue it's actually necessary
Yeah.
and can even be positive.
That's right. And this is another one of those key insights that really pushes back against our natural inclinations. Disagreement is just inevitable when you're working with other people.
Sure.
But the sources argue that avoiding it is actually worse than facing it. When it's navigated productively, with compassion. Conflicts can lead to better outcomes, more creative solutions, even stronger relationships, because you're actually working through the real issues directly.
So the problem isn't conflict itself, it's managing the wrong kind of conflict, like the destructive personal attack.
Exactly that. We need to spend time creating the conditions for the right kind of conflict.
Okay, so how do you make sure it's the right kind?
Well, the sources suggest it needs to be normalized and facilitated, especially by leaders.
Yeah.
Leaders should actively give people permission to voice disagreements.
Make it okay to disagree.
Yeah, and ensure psychological safety. That feeling that you can speak up with ideas, questions, concerns, even mistakes, without fearing punishment or humiliation. That creates the environment where constructive disagreement can actually happen.
That makes complete sense. You need that safety net to disagree productively. The sources also offered a really helpful, structured framework for approaching those difficult conversations that often come out of conflict.
Yes, a four-step approach for when you know you're heading into one or find yourself in one. First, be other-focused.
Okay.
Before you react, make a real effort to understand the other person's perspective. What's motivating them? What do they care about? What's a rational reason, even if you disagree with it for their stance? Put yourself in their shoes first.
Try to see their map of the world before you start talking about yours.
Exactly. Second, identify the real disagreement. What are you actually disagreeing about? Is it the facts, the
Yeah.
goals, the methods, underlying values? Avoid that easy shortcut of just blaming personalities. Oh, we just don't get along, or they're just being difficult.
Yeah, get past the emotion to the substance.
That's critical. Third, define your goal. What you personally need to get out of this conversation. Is it a specific project outcome? Is it preserving the relationship? Is it just understanding something better? Being clear on your objective helps you stay focused and figure out what success looks like beyond just winning the argument.
Know what you're actually aiming for.
And fourth, proceed thoughtfully. Don't just charge in impulsively. Think about the best way to set up the conversation for success. Where should it happen? In person, phone, Zoom? Who else needs to be there? When's the best time? Thinking it through helps prevent unintended blowback and sets a much better tone.
That structure feels like a really solid roadmap, especially when emotions might be running high. I also remember the sources mentioning pace, space, grace.
Yes, that's more of an in-the-moment technique for when you're suddenly hit with opposition or strong disagreement. First, pace. Slow down your reaction. Don't just jump back defensively.
Okay, pal.
Then, give yourself mental space to really process their perspective. Try to understand why they might be opposing you. What information might they have that you don't?
Right.
And finally, give yourself grace to listen to your intuition about the best way to respond in that specific moment, rather than just having a knee-jerk defensive reaction.
Giving yourself that pause and space sounds absolutely essential. And the sources went even further, calling opposition a gift. That feels very counterintuitive.
It does, right. But that's the key insight. The sources argue that really listening to why someone is opposing you is a gift, because it often reveals crucial information, maybe constraints, or different perspectives you wouldn't have known otherwise.
So it's an opportunity to learn something.
Exactly. To learn and improve your own understanding or your proposal. There was that story about the screen reamer whose pitch got questioned as science fiction. His first instinct could have been to get defensive, right? But instead, he asked, "Tell me more about why you see it that way." And he learned the executive had recently been burned by some expensive sci-fi projects that failed.
Ah, crucial context.
Totally. And knowing that allowed him to reframe his pitch, address those concerns directly, and ultimately succeed. So opposition isn't just a barrier, it's an invitation to a deeper conversation,
Yeah.
potentially leading to a better outcome.
Wow. Seeing it as an invitation to learn rather than something you just have to defend against, that completely changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
It really does.
The goal becomes inviting the other person to work with you, not just making them defensive.
Exactly. And building on that idea of navigating interactions, the sources also touched on the importance of relationships, particularly at work. They explicitly called them the cake, not just the icing.
The cake, I love that. Meaning not just a nice bonus, but essential.
Fundamental, yeah. Positive work relationships aren't just nice to have. They're fundamental to performance, collaboration, innovation, and just general well-being. And tied very closely to that is the need for boundaries. Boundaries are critical for managing those relationships, especially at work, to make sure that friendship or personal dynamics don't negatively impact the professional side of things or the work itself.
Right.
Setting clear expectations about communication, availability, roles that helps keep both the relationship and the work healthy.
Being clear on those lines sounds really important for long-term health. And finally, in this section, the sources touched on the value of authenticity in communication.
Yes, being real is powerful. The sources argue that sharing your struggles sometimes, or admitting, I don't actually know what the best answer is here, can make you sound more authentic, more vulnerable, and ultimately more trustworthy.
Interesting.
It fosters collaboration because it invites others to jump in and help solve the problem together, rather than expecting you to have all the answers perfectly packaged. They mentioned admiring the comedian Tig Notaro for her kind of surprising authenticity on stage,
Yeah, I remember that mention.
which resonates so deeply with audiences precisely because it feels real and unexpected.
It definitely takes courage to be authentic like that, but it sounds like the payoff and connection can be huge.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears now to some specific contexts for communication, starting with the virtual world that, well, so many of us live in now.
Right. Virtual communication, especially platforms like Zoom, they present unique challenges, but also opportunities that the sources explored. They noted Zoom can be this weird equalizer. Everyone gets the same size square on the screen,
Yeah.
which can actually paradoxically disempower people who usually rely heavily on, say, body language, physical presence, or kind of working the room in person.
That makes sense. You lose all those subtle physical cues that convey presence or maybe even status in a physical room.
You do.
Yeah.
And power and status get signaled differently online, often through things like the formality or tidiness of the room you can see behind them, or even just how far they are from the camera. Being slightly further back, showing a bit more of your space, can subtly signal more authority, according to some observations in the sources.
Fascinating how those nonverbal signals kind of translate or morph online. And they had a funny but really practical piece of advice about how you look virtually.
Oh yeah, avoiding the witness protection program look.
Right.
Good lighting is just essential if you want to look present and engaged, not like you're lurking in the shadows. And for practical advice on getting good lighting and generally looking better online, the sources had a great suggestion. Ask a teenager.
Solid advice. They probably know all the tricks.
They're often fluent in optimizing their appearance for screens, thanks to things like TikTok and, well, just growing up with it.
Very true. And the sources mentioned how all this virtual interaction can lead to really surprising perceptions when you finally meet someone in person. Like that comment about realizing how short someone was after only seeing their head and shoulders in a box for months.
It just highlights how much the virtual environment shapes our perception, doesn't it? And how important it is to be mindful of how we present ourselves, visually and verbally, in that specific context.
Definitely. Now, let's tackle another high-stakes context. Communication around decision-making, but viewed through this really unconventional lens of venture capital.
Yeah, this is a really powerful perspective the sources offer, encouraging us to think differently about how we discuss things and how we decide things. Venture capitalists, they make incredibly high-stakes decisions all the time with very incomplete information.
Right. It's their job.
And one key aspect of the VC mindset that really influences their communication is a fundamental embracing of failure. They're not afraid of it. In fact, they actively seek constructive failure and prioritize learning from it really quickly.
The Slack example from the sources was great for illustrating that. It started as something completely different, right? A glitchy online game called Glitch that, well, failed.
Totally failed. But the company didn't just pack up. They learned from that failure, pivoted, using the resources and team they had left, and created Slack, which obviously became hugely successful.
Right.
So this mindset is about swinging for the fences, going for the outliers, because the successful outliers are what generate those massive returns. And organizations with this mindset, according to the sources, they actually promote people who failed and learn from it.
Yeah.
They value that hard-won experience over just a spotless record achieved by always playing it safe.
That's such a stark contrast to many traditional places where failure is something you hide or get punished for.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this mindset translates into specific, sometimes counterintuitive, communication practices in their decision processes. The sources highlighted two key ones. First, when they're evaluating opportunities, the smartest VCs often start by asking, why should we not do this?
Instead of building the case for why should we do this, they immediately hunt for the red flags.
Precisely. If you're looking at potentially thousands of investments, you can't waste time building a detailed pro case for every single one. They start by looking for the knockout factors, the reasons not to invest.
Okay.
It leads to more efficient, quicker decisions. And it frames the whole conversation around surfacing potential pitfalls right up front. Plus, the decisions are often seen as non-final bets, like small experiments designed to learn more. It's a communication filter built for efficiency and risk identification.
That's a really significant shift in how you'd frame the discussion around a new opportunity. What was the second practice?
Encouraging dissent, like as the design principle for decision-making.
Actively encouraging disagreement.
Yes. The sources argue pretty vehemently that unanimity actually hinders innovation, especially when things are uncertain. Smart VCs actively design processes that require, or at least allow, disagreement to surface and be valued, not suppressed. The story is Zoom, which started as SOSB, is a perfect example they cited. The seed fund at Qualcomm Ventures actually allowed the investment to go ahead, even though the main investment committee unanimously opposed it.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they had this built-in agree-to-disagree mechanism for smaller checks, which allowed a bet based on conviction, even when the majority disagreed.
So even if most of the team says no, there's a process that lets an idea with a strong champion still get a shot.
Exactly. It's a way to combat groupthink and make sure potentially transformative ideas don't get killed prematurely just because they don't fit the current consensus.
Makes sense.
And another practice they use to encourage dissent is disrupting deference to seniority.
How do they do that?
Well, one method is having the newer or more novice people speak first in discussions, and the most experienced experts speak last.
Ah, so junior people aren't anchored by what the boss thinks.
Right. It encourages independent thought and genuine disagreement based on the merits of the idea, not just who proposed it or who supports it.
These are really powerful communication practices. They definitely challenge the way many teams and organizations usually make decisions.
They really do. And the sources encourage all of us to apply this VC mindset, to question how we make decisions and challenge ourselves to do it differently.
Like asking ourselves, are we building the why do this case or starting with why not?
Exactly. Are we actually encouraging dissent, or is there subtle pressure for everyone to just agree? Thinking long-term, embracing learning from failure, building a broad, strategically diverse network, also mentioned is crucial. It's all part of this communication-driven approach to making better decisions under uncertainty.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. From the internal work, managing anxiety and mindset, to refining our message, navigating tricky interactions like conflict and listening, and even borrowing communication practices from VCs for decision-making. How do we bring all this together, make it practical in our daily lives?
Yeah, good question. This is where structures and just deliberate practice really come in. The sources emphasize that using structures, especially for spontaneous speaking, acts like a roadmap when your brain feels kind of chaotic.
Right.
They give you a simple, repeatable framework to help organize your thoughts quickly when you're put on the spot.
Like a container to just drop your ideas into quickly.
Exactly. A common one mentioned is problem, solution, benefit.
Okay.
You quickly identify an issue, present your proposed solution, and then explain the benefits of that solution. Pretty straightforward. And it can be adapted easily to opportunity, solution, benefit if you're proposing an improvement rather than fixing something broken.
Got it. Another one was what? So what? Now what?
Yeah, that's a super versatile structure.
Yeah.
Great for conveying information or giving feedback. What is the basic info, the situation? So why is this important? Why should the audience care? What's the relevance? And now what? Okay, so what should be done next? What are the next steps or considerations? You can apply this directly to giving feedback. Here's what I observed. Here's why it's important or what the impact was. And here's what I suggest we do differently next time.
That seems really useful for feedback and for quick pitches, that 4-sentence starter pitch.
Yes. That one's basically a fill-in-the-blank template. What if you could do something desirable?
Okay.
So that key benefit. Then, for example, a specific illustration. And finally, that's not all add another hook or benefit. You fill those in and boom, you've got a tight, clear pitch for an idea or product in like under a minute.
Having these structures kind of ready to go in your mental toolkit seems like it would significantly reduce that deer in the headlights feeling when you need to think and speak fast.
They provide essential scaffolding, definitely.
Yeah.
And this is crucial. The sources also make it really clear that just knowing the structures isn't enough.
Right, I gotta practice.
Communication skills aren't like flipping a switch. They require deliberate practice, just like an athlete drills specific moves over and over. You have to actively practice using these structures in low-stakes situations. Consciously try the techniques we've talked about.
So it's really about building that muscle memory through repetition.
Precisely. It's a skill you develop over time, not overnight. And finally, kind of tying everything together, the sources constantly remind us. Always start with your audience.
Audience first.
Who are you talking to? What do they already know? What do they need from you in this particular moment? Then, find the intersection between their needs and your authentic voice and personality.
Ah, okay.
That combination, audience relevance, meeting your genuine self, that's what makes communication truly effective and impactful.
Audience and authenticity. That feel like a really powerful guiding principle for pretty much all communication, whether it's spontaneous or planned.
Absolutely. Well, we've done a pretty deep dive today into some really powerful insights, mostly from these Stanford experts, on mastering communication when it really matters most.
Yeah, we've covered a huge range. Practical ways to tame that nervous feeling, becoming a better listener,
Hmm.
frameworks for navigating conflict with more compassion, and even adopting those counterintuitive but really interesting communication practices from venture capital to improve decision making.
And this deep dive was possible because you shared these really valuable sources, showing your commitment to being truly well-informed on a topic that, let's face it, impacts so many parts of our lives and work.
So maybe consider this as you go about your week, thinking about applying some of these ideas. If communication really is fundamental to relationships, to influence, to success, and if intentional practice, shifting our mindset, changing our approach can dramatically improve it, what single communication habit will you commit to changing this week? The one you think will make the biggest impact on your life.
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Wow, what an enlightening discussion that was. A big thank you to our experts, Dr. Mia Thompson and Dr. Alex Garcia, for sharing such valuable insights on how we can all think faster and speak more effectively. From managing our anxiety to reframing our mindset and focusing on clear communication strategies, it's clear that improving our communication skills is an essential aspect of personal and professional growth. As we learned today, it's not just about the content of our message, but how we deliver it and interact with others. By adopting these strategies, we can enhance our confidence in those spontaneous moments and ensure our communication is effective and impactful. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this episode of Wellness and Us Weekly podcast. If you found today's insights helpful, please give us a thumbs up, share this podcast with your friends, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more episodes. We would love to hear your thoughts. What communication challenges do you face? Let us know in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. Remember, every opportunity to communicate is a chance to connect, inspire, and grow. Until next time, stay well and continue to communicate effectively.